So what I would like to do now is we currently don't have a front end to this website. And so when I talk about front end and back end here, I'm not meaning so much like server side versus client side. I'm meaning more like when I say back end, I mean this administrative side of things where you have active admin and the administrator is doing things like adding schools or students. And the quote unquote front end, I mean more like what you would have as a user-facing website. Someone who is not an administrator coming to this web page, what might they see? And so this is exactly. So this backend, what I call a backend, is a tool for our web page, but it's not the web page itself. The web page itself is not yet built. If I go to the root route, all I've got is that welcome to Rails message. So we haven't yet built a controller. We haven't yet built really anything. We've just given that tool, Active Admin, access to our models so that we could do the CRUD in the administration dashboard. That's what I should really call it. I'll call it the admin dashboard, which is what it is. Now we have to build the public-facing side of this website. And what I'd like to do in this public-facing side of the website is I would like to show you how to associate images with particular resources. So we're going to have students and they're going to have images. And then we will display those images. Now the way that I'll be linking these images in is limited and somewhat flawed. And so you'll get to see sort of a simple way of adding images to a Rails application, but then I'll talk about how you would probably better do it or how it would be better done in your project by way of one of Rails's attachment plugins. So let's begin. If you recall what the data model looked like here for my app, here's my little schoolhouse. Whenever I want to remember what the database looks like, I can go into the DB folder and pull up the schema.rb. There's my schools and students. So a student has a name, a student number, its timestamps, and then that foreign key school ID. What I would like here as well is somewhere to store an image file name. And it's just going to be that. I'm going to put images in a set folder within the Rails structure, the folder where image assets go, and I'll just manually put those images in that folder. That's where one of the limitations comes in, is that it's a manual process. And then I will save the names of those images for each row of students, and that'll be the image used for that particular student. So I need a new column in my students table. And so last class when we needed a new column for the foreign key, we used a migration to create that, so we'll do the same today. So I'll navigate to that folder, and from that folder I will do a Rails G for generate migration. And again, like when I added the user or the school reference, I can do sort of a well-named migration, and Rails, based on my naming conventions, will write the migration for me. And so I will say add, and then the thing that I wish to add, which is image, to the table that I wish to add to students. And it's all camel case, or even like title case, because the first A is even capitalized. So add image to students, so add an image column to the students table, where that image column is a string. So that'll get me that new column. Or at least that'll get me a migration, which when I run it will get me the new column. So when this generator runs, it'll tell us the migration that was created. We can take a quick peek at that migration just to confirm that it correctly interpreted my conventions here. So the migration is timestamped with the current date and time, and then it's called add image to students. So you notice that it took the title case and it broke it out into snake case for the name. And if we look in the migrate folder, there is the add image to students, and it has a single command in it, which is add column, Where are we adding column? Students table. What column are we adding? An image. What type is it? It's a string. So I can run this now with a Rails DB migrate. And once that migration runs, I'll do a git commit. Add dot minus m. One of the students in the other class asked, if there was some kind of way of shortening. I'm always typing git add dot git commit. Yes, there is ways to do that, and I do it on some of my machines, and so this is a common question. But again, it's aliasing that I have used in the past, just like Linux-based command aliasing. So commit minus m, and here I've added an image column to students. And that's that. Now, I want some kind of controller on the front end side of things, and so I'm going to generate a controller. So I'll do a Rails G for generate. What am I generating? I'm generating a controller. I might generate students controller, because that's what I want to display, students. I might generate a schools controller, because really what I want to generate is like a list of schools and the students in those associated schools. Or I could also, I could just assume that I'm maybe making just like the front page of this website, which happens to include students and schools. So I might just create something called like a home controller, sort of a more generic controller. That's what I'll do here, a home controller. It's going to have a single controller action called index, and so because I know that it's going to have that one action, I can specify that up front, but that's optional. I could run this generator without that. The added benefit of adding it is it'll create the view folder and the index.html.erb file for me. And so there you go. You see there the index was created, the controller itself was created, a route was added, but I'm going to change that route. So I can add that. What? Added the home controller with an empty index actions/view. Okay, so, uh-oh, did it say killed? What does that mean? That means... Why? Why does it do that? That's so frustrating.
I know we've looked at being G-killed before, but all we got were quotes from Compton.
It's always like... Josh is always ready with the hold music. Okay, I'm gonna put this video on. There we are. Okay, so now we have a route that we need to change, which is in our config folder routes. So my generator added this get home index, but I don't want to have to go to /home/index. I want this should be the home page or the root. So I'll say the root should go to my home controller's index action. Notice in here, active admin is present for some devise routes and for the active admin routes itself. And so it registered itself into my routing file when I installed active admin. So again, if I go over here and I reload my local host, I should now see that sort of the default template that goes into a generated view, which will just tell me like your view is at this particular location. There it is. One thing to make note of here is that there's some formatting. some styling that's been applied to this view that's not standard. And when you typically open up a Rails app, you don't see this kind of font. This is ActiveAdmin. If we view source in here, we'll see that ActiveAdmin has dropped in like a whole bunch of assets into my application. When I get a little bit further in this tutorial, I'll show you how to remove those so that they only affect the ActiveAdmin backend and not your app as a whole. It's sort of a bug/feature in ActiveAdmin in that it sort of infects your entire app with its styling. But I'll leave it in for now, and then we can rip it out in a moment. Okay, so over here we have a controller, which is my home controller, and its associated view, which is in the view folder. And what I want to do here is I want to load up all of my schools, school.all. And save it into an @schools instance variable. That @schools instance variable will be shared into the associated view. And so in the associated view here, I'm going to change this h1 to say all schools. And then here I'm going to go to that schools variable, and for each school, I will drop an h2 with the school name. And then further, I will loop through that school's students, and then for each student, I will output some information about the student. Maybe here I might do something like have a class school for this structure. Like that, and then inside of this structure here, I might have a class of student, just because if this was a real world application, I'd probably eventually want to start styling these things. And then, let's see, I'll do an h3 for the student name. And then we also have a student number, which will be the student number. So that'll loop through all my schools, dropping down divs for each school with h2s for the school names. Then for every school, we'll loop through the students that are present for those schools and drop down div classes for each student, which will have the student names and their student numbers inside of it. It's here that I would also like to display, eventually display student image here. So that's just a little HTML comment for displaying the image. So that's pretty standard ERB. I won't go into the full details here, but there is a performance hit in this application. So the performance hit is that at this level here, I've found all of the schools. And then in the view, I am looping through every school and then asking for the students that belong to each individual school. So at this point here, Rails will defer SQL execution. But the minute I start pulling data out of the schools object, that SQL will fire, and it'll do a select star from schools. Then down here, I'm asking for the school's students. So for every pass of this loop, I'm going to make yet another SQL call where it's going to do a select star on the students table where the school ID is the particular school, this is called an n+1 bug, meaning that I'm going to have n+1 queries fired off where I could really just only have one query fired off.
How much does that matter, though?
It only matters when n is a large number. Yeah. So I won't bother fixing it right here, but there's a whole bunch of ways of doing what are called eager loads at this point. So I could do like a school dot, I think I can just say like includes students, and this will likely eager load the students. We could even try it both ways and see what the server ends up showing us in terms of, because it'll show the query/queries. So I'll do it this way first. So let's see what this front end looks like. But you're right, at this point, it's nothing I need to really worry about, but it's a classic Rails bug. So when people go and do sort of performance reviews of Rails apps, there's gems that will actually actively watch your Rails app for n+1 bugs, and those are really easy to fix up because you just add eager loading. So here it is. I mean, I only have one student associated with each of these two schools, and this school has no students. If we look in the back end over here, you can see here's my n+1 queries. So I've got the select star from schools, and then I've got 3 different queries, one for each school ID. If I modify it, I can't always remember my eager loading, which one. There's a bunch of different way of doing eager loading, so I don't know if this is the fix. And I don't know if it's include or includes. And over here, a little bit better, right? So I've got a select school from schools, and then a single select statement to find all the students where they happen to be part of one of the 3 schools, and then the active record will step in to sort out the associations between those students and schools. So I went from n+1 to 2. So that's better.
And which of the numbers there, are you looking at anything in particular to like evaluate? Like there's a lot of like milliseconds.
Yeah, those I never really worry so much about because again, with a data set this small, the number of milliseconds that's going to be triggering a query, the variant will probably be within the margin of error.
Okay.
So it's just going to be like my own bias thinking, oh, I've optimized something or I've not optimized something, and yeah. So until I get way more data in this application, I won't look at those numbers. And there are really nice gems that add like a debug bar at the bottom of your web output that show you those numbers. And then just as you're developing your app, you'll start to get a feel for what's normal, and then you could do something and all of a sudden you see those numbers change drastically, and you can say, okay, I've introduced a problem here.
Could you not use the files or the JavaScript that's compiled in the webpack folder and step through your code with Chrome tools?
You can, but again, then those numbers are more like the full stack of numbers, right? They're more like, they're not just what the back end is affecting the performance. They're like the HTTP stack is involved now, and like the CSS rendering is involved. So, but yeah, if you wanted to get a better picture of your app as a whole, you can do, I think what's called like the candlestick view, where it shows you like sort of the rendering time of everything. Oh, okay. So here we got these things, and I want images associated with these students, and so I need some images that I can put into the image folder. So there is a image assets folder in every Rails project. So here's my little schoolhouse. In the app assets folder, we have a place for style sheets, a place for JavaScripts, and a place for images. Currently empty. And so I'm going to drop 2 images in there. I'm just going to manually put these images in there, and then we'll go from there. Do an image search for Wally Glutton. What's this? There we are. There I am. View image.
He's real.
Wally Glutton is real, yeah.
He looks just like you.
Yeah, isn't it weird?
Well, that's not a young you.
That is a Kyle. Let's see. So this is
It's a wild Kyle.
it's a Wally Glutton. It's also a Wally Glutton in a submarine. Yeah. I'm totally inside of a submarine there. So there you go. That's the. I am. Yeah. In Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
Yeah.
I feel like this joke is sinking.
Oh.
All right. I don't know. Is there another image here I can use for Daisy Glutton? This can be Daisy Glutton right here. Oops.
These are copyrighted material.
I did not put any filters in place. This is not the right folder. Those are very different. This is a very different Wally Glutton.
That's post-op Wally.
Lily, app, assets, images. Where did I save the last one? Oh, this is a JPEG, that's why. Okay. Oh, I did not save that one to the right place, the Wally one here. Okay, so there we have daisy.jpg and a wally.png, which is sort of nice, two different types of images, and I had to manually put them into this folder. I want to now be able to add those from ActiveAdmin, but we have to remember that if we want ActiveAdmin to change any of our column data, we have to give it permission to do so, and so I will have to change the whitelisted parameters for ActiveAdmin. Now, whenever I use Git, I feel like I'm playing with fire, so
Add some spice to go with it.
the home controller index now displays all schools and students. I now have to go into my app admin folder and open the students, and here I'm going to add image to the whitelisted permitted parameters. Otherwise, ActiveAdmin will not allow me to modify that new column. Heading back over here to my little schoolhouse, to the admin side of things. Going to students, I can edit Daisy Glutton here, and for Daisy it was a JPEG. So I'm just putting in the file name. I'm not constraining myself with the path at all, and we're going to see why in a moment. And so there's just the file name, and I will do the same thing for Wally Glutton. And Wally was a ping. So that data is now present in the database. In my view, in this index.html.erb, I will temporarily echo out just the file name itself. So student.image, right there. So of course this won't display the image, it'll just output the text, which is the file name. Verifying that looks good. Wally Glutton, Daisy Glutton. So again, we might be tempted at this point to do like something like an image tag with an src that we point to the image. Image tags are self-closing. They require alts. So I would put something in there. But that's not going to work because the image folder, this image assets folder, is not just something we can directly path to. There is something in Rails called the asset pipeline, which manages our assets. It manages our images, it manages our JavaScripts, it manages our style sheets, and it manages them in a way so that in production mode, they will be heavily cached, meaning that certain HTTP headers will be sent to the user's browsers saying, heavily cache these things. Because images and style sheets and JavaScripts don't tend to change very often, so you can like put really far, far future caches on them. But they do sometimes change, and so the asset pipeline needs to be able to force the user's browser to reload them if they do change. So what it does is when serving out these images or when serving out any of our assets, it serves them out with a file hash in the file name associated with them, so like a digital fingerprint of the file. So if the file ever changed, that file hash really changes, and then the browser will see it as a completely different resource and fetch it as a heavily cached asset. So what do I do then if I want to display an image? Well, just like when we wanted to make links in our views and we used link to as a helper to build those links, we have an image tag helper which will build image tags for us. So image tag will take in the name of my student image, and the assumption is that I put this in my app assets images folder, and so image tag will path to it properly with the correct asset management in place.
So image tag will always go to assets.
Yes, yeah, it'll always go there. There's probably ways of, if you need it to go elsewhere, of configuring it to do so, but by default it always goes there. Yeah.
Can you give it an alt tag too?
It should give it an alt tag. You can probably override the alt tag with something like maybe the name, but let's see what it does for the alt tag. I imagine the alt tag is going to be probably the name of the file without the extension on it. And so there are my two images. If I view source, look at what those assets look like.
Tag is the actual username.
Oh, that's cool. So, I bet you what they did though is it actually took the file name, split it on underscore, because it's like the glutton is lowercase. So I don't think it was clever enough to grab the name. I think it took the file name and it turned the underscore into a space and capitalized the first letter. But that's just a guess. So I gave it an alt tag. This is that fingerprint I was talking about. That's like a hash. I don't know what hashing algorithm was used for it, but a hashing algorithm was used so that this asset can now be heavily cached by our browsers. But if the asset ever does change, the hash will change and the browser will then ask for a new version of it. And that's the simplest way of getting images into a Rails application. Now there are downsides. So look at these two images. This one is of a certain size, and this one is much larger. If I wanted these images to both be of consistent size or consistent aspect ratio, I would need to manually edit them. And so, for example, this image right here is like 300 by 300, whereas this image here is 650. So I could like open this up with Paint, and I could resize it to at least match the horizontal. Save that and reload. Even though these are heavily cached, we should get the new version of the image because Rails will detect that the file's changed and then that fingerprint will change. And there you go. So now we have somewhat matching images. if you're building out a giant e-commerce website that has hundreds of products in it, you're not going to want to, for every image, manually resize that image. The other thing you might want to happen is for any like high resolution image you add to your project, you probably want a number of versions of those images. You might want a thumbnail, a small, a medium, and a large that you could display in different aspects of your website, and you might want those small, medium, large, and thumbnails to be certain heights or widths to match the design of your website. Yeah.
What's your take on SVGs?
Thumbs up.
Cool.
Yeah. No, I don't have too much experience with it, but I mean, vector graphics are always better in terms of scaling, right?
Well, then you wouldn't be using any
Then you don't need all the different versions because they just scale. But I don't have a lot of experience other than with like SVG icons. And I find those to be really awesome, again, for the scaling purposes. What I do use for images is there's two different gems that I've used with Rails before. One is called Paperclip, the other one's called Carrier Wave. And with both of them, they provide a way of doing file uploads. So from your backend admin panel, you would click a file picker, you would pick the image instead of typing in its file name, and on upload, Carrier Wave or Paperclip will automatically resize your image into a variety of formats for you, specified by a config file. So you would say, you know, this is what a thumbnail is, this is what a medium, this is what a large is, and then in your rest of your website, you could use those different versions where appropriate, and Rails would manage all the different sizes for you. So that's my recommendation for your project. These days I'm using Carrier Wave. I've had students use both and be successful, and then none of that manual work needs to be done. When you load them up though, you're still going to be loading them up with image tag. But Carrier Wave will give you certain helper properties on your model object to be able to pull in the various size images that you want to deal with. So the last thing I want to do with this project here, I will look at Git for a moment here. Add displaying student images on the home index. So the last thing I want to do here is I said that, you know, active admin styling was sort of polluting the rest of my application. If I am going to create all of my own styles for my app, I don't want active admin's styles in there. And if we view source, we can see that active admin has not just added its own styles, but it's also added a bunch of jQuery UI assets and like all of these JavaScript assets. So there's a bunch of things that active admin has shoved into my app which should not be there. I'm going to see if the typical fix that I have works. There is, in the app assets JavaScript folder, an active admin JS. In the app assets stylesheets folder, there is an active admin SCSS file. I'm going to move those to a place where we put vendor-specific files, vendor meaning third party. And so in the vendor folder, I am going to make a assets folder. I say that with hesitation in my voice because they're, in older apps, there used to be one. And so just to make sure that I am doing this correctly, I can go to, I think, an older app that I have built in the past and see what I did there. Vendor assets. So this is what I'll try. I'll make a vendor assets JavaScripts and style sheets. This will be an experiment. I don't know if this style works with the latest version of Rails. We will soon find out. So vendor, I will make a new folder called assets. Yeah, and then JavaScripts and style sheets. New JavaScripts, plural, and style sheets. And then I'll use git to move those too. So git move app assets JavaScripts activeadmin to vendor assets JavaScripts, and git move app assets style sheets activeadmin to vendor assets style sheets. If this doesn't work, I will move them back and I'll do some research outside of class to see what the latest and greatest way of sort of vendoring these assets is, if this doesn't work. Okay, so those are in the new places. So when I go back over here to my front end, I should be back to like sort of plain old boring non-styled markup, which I am. If I view source, the amount of assets in this list is much smaller. But what I'm really concerned about is now will activeadmin be able to access those assets now that I've vendored them? And we'll know that very quickly right here. So this is where I get to do some research offline. So it looks like the asset pipeline has changed somewhat since I last taught this course, in that I can't just vendor these assets by moving them to a different location. And so I'll do that research offline. I won't make you watch me do that research, but there's got to be some other way to vendor these assets so they don't infect the rest of my application. So I'll stop this, this video right here.